course, it was. Of course, it was quick. I like to get these things done on time and pronto. I have no
Do
idea why.
you do you have like a schedule or something?
No, no, I'm very chaotic.
Ah, I see.
Anyway, hey guys, or I don't really expect anyone to see this while we're live, but for those who see it post mortem, we're going to be debating G Canon versus EU, or at least talking about it.
Actually, what we're actually going to be doing is we're going to be taking the Jedi, the great, brilliant Jedi Knights of Star Wars, from all versions of canon within the Star Wars multiverse, and we're going to compare how all of them basically, how should I say this? We're basically going to compare the pros and cons of all of them. This includes G canon, T canon, EU, Disney canon, and so on and so forth, because there's so many varieties, but that's what happens when you have a franchise.
And you have multiple cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, that is also true.
But to be fair, some of those cooks were really talented. Karen Travis comes to mind,
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
except for her treatment of the Jedi. That is questionable.
Well, to be honest, like Filoni, a lot of EU writers weren't the biggest fans of the Jedi. And George was the only one who seemed to be defending them, at least from where I'm standing.
Okay, did they ever say why they didn't like them? Like, I get the reason not for liking them because the EU, but why did they? Because they probably were writing about them before they became assholes.
I wouldn't say that they like hated the Jedi, but they were critical. Like, for one thing, people had a very should I say different, they had a very, I guess, fantastical idea of the Jedi in their heads, to the point where they're amazing, they can do no wrong, they're perfect, because of the how iconic, the original trilogy is. And of course, Alec Guinness's brilliant performance as Obi-Wan Kenobi, or Ben Kenobi. It's like the way he describes the Jedi gave a lot of people a very angelic feel. So when George makes the prequels, and he shows that the Jedi were strict and rigid, and they had a system, and they were against relationships and attachments, at least the kinds of official relationships which lead to attachments, not like having a friend or someone to have sex with, but non-marriage and such. But my point here is that when George went into more detail about how the Jedi operated, a lot of fans, preferably EU fans, and some fans of who were critical of the prequels, weren't exactly in all in alignment with the Jedi's mindset. Some people thought they were flawed. Some people believe that only being selfless and helpful and compassionate is an incomplete form of living, and that the Jedi are essentially inhuman because of this. Which is ironic, because the majority of the Jedi were aliens, and in the Star Wars, multiverse, humanity was a small portion. They were like very small.
Yeah, which is weird because like I never saw the Jedi as bad or assholes in them. Well, okay, maybe assholes. Like Mace Windu, I think was an asshole, I like him for the record. Like I consider Mace Windu. I'm still reading Shatterpoint, but from little I know of him, he's still one of my favorite Jedi because he has a really cool ability.
Well, I mean, the thing is, it really all depends on perspective. But when it comes down to it, you know, with T canon, which is television canon for Star Wars, which is done primarily by Filoni with the Clone Wars, the 2008 version, and EU, which is the EU. People were able to express their own perspectives on the Jedi and everything else, since George created the Star Wars multiverse canon system, where his G canon, which is the main universe, is where he lays out how he feels about everything and how everything works. And these other canons, other artists get to, put their own, like you said, they get to put their own tools in the kitchen and cook for themselves. So as a result, Nathan, they basically painted their ideas of how they felt the Jedi are and how they felt the galaxy is. And I'm not going to say that they completely went off in other directions like say Disney does, but they did. It is clear that you could tell when George is writing when George is in a project and when he isn't. And I think a perfect example of that is stories that often say, well, sometimes attachments aren't a bad thing for Jedi. Like like the Clone Wars episode when Ahsoka and Barriss Offee, there was a chance on that mission, I believe, on Geonosis where they could die, and Anakin and Luminara were basically debating on if they should save their Padawans or not. Luminara was willing to let them go. She was willing to accept that they may die. But Anakin, being Anakin, was very passionate and very attached to Ahsoka, and he was not willing to let her die. So the episode, it shows that Ahsoka and Luminara got out. They escaped with their lives despite the situation. But Anakin and but the narrative of the episode portrays Anakin as the one that's correct about, not giving up on his Padawan right away, despite the facts that, attachments are wrong. So it's clear from that episode to me, Nathan, that Filoni is a little critical on how the Jedi, live. I mean, Luminara in season 7, he specifically it's like as the seasons go by, he specifically tries to paint the Jedi in a way where they're hypocritical to their teachings. Like he believes, I think he established in the show that Luminara was too distant to the point where she'd always be willing to let people die and accept their demise, basically without even trying to save them once if there was a possibility because of her sticking to the no attachment rule. But
Yeah.
so yeah, it's like he's trying to not it's like he's trying to not say that having no attachments is wrong, but at the same time try to wiggle his own ideas in there about how you shouldn't be so distant on people.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could tell. I don't know if you remember this stuff. So you could tell that Filoni has his own ideas about the Jedi and attachments, and that even though he does agree with George that the Jedi should be this way, he doesn't agree with every way they go about it. So he thinks being too distant, or he thinks the Jedi are too distant sometimes, and that's a flaw. Now,
I remember, I think I heard it was when they were doing the show, George would make suggestions and Filoni would decide whether to incorporate those suggestions or not. Like the line about the Mandalorian advisor saying Jango Fett was just a common bounty hunter. How he got his hands on that armor is beyond me. That was suggested by George Lucas. Now, this is one of the things that George Lucas has said that kind of draws me up a wall. For me, Fets have always been Mandalorians. I say not fuck everything else, but beyond that, he doesn't generally piss me off. But yeah, it is weird because I actually like the G Canon version of Jedi better because while they are assholes, I think they have good intentions. Like the Jedi in the EU are much worse.
oh yeah, they are. The hypocrites that the T canon tries to make, because the T canon is like an alternate timeline for the G canon. So the T canon tries to portray the Jedi, at least from the perspective of the G. They try to portray the Jedi from the G canon, from the perspective of the T canon. I'm sorry if that sounds confusing, in a more nuanced light, closer to the EU Jedi, because the G canon Jedi are pretty straightforward in the sense that, for the most part, they were compassionate, and their flaw and their issue wasn't necessarily um a full-on flaw. Their issues more or less were the fact that they were tragically manipulated and tricked to their own demise. The Jedi were the victims in the G canon, whereas in the EU and the T canon and even the Disney canon, the Jedi are somewhat put at fault for the actions of everything that happens. You could tell that, everyone outside of George believes that the Jedi play some role in the destruction of everything, because to George, that's not the case. George blames Anakin, the Republic, and the Sith alone, and thinks that the Jedi were always right. He makes this clear in a lot of his documentaries. He makes it clear that Anakin was wrong. And George doesn't seem to have a complex, I shouldn't say complex. He doesn't seem to have a morally gray viewpoint when it comes down to it to him, despite how complicated the situation was. Anakin was wrong for what he did. The Sith were wrong. The Republic was wrong. The Jedi were right.
Yeah, but this is kind of why I like the EU a little bit, because there is complexity, and I like complexity. I find that very entertaining. Sometimes it makes me want to rip the hair out of my head,
What?
but it's what I like about the EU. Now, I do like the fact that, yeah, no, the Jedi, even if you go by just the G canon, you do see that this is them at a very weak point in their time. Their order is kind of, I don't know, waning slightly, if that even makes sense. Or they're on a down, or they're in a low point again. Like this kind of happens even in the EU. They go through lows and highs.
Actually, Nathan, an interesting thing that George said was that the Jedi find themselves in a conflict, and this is for the G canon. They find themselves in a conflict because when Palpatine drafted them into the Clone Wars, a lot of Jedi didn't like this because they believed that all this would do was either A, corrupt them, or B, it would, it would ruin the status quo that they fought so hard to keep. And you had a lot of Jedi that were in conflict about it. You had other Jedi that were fine with it because they believed they were helping the galaxy, that they could bring peace back to the galaxy by getting involved in the Clone Wars. And the Jedi themselves were in major conflict. Should we, say no? Should we try to say no? Should we try to say no and just let this all happen? And, and it could get worse. Or should we get involved and try to help everyone? And what George basically said was that the Jedi were having a moral crisis around the Clone Wars. So in the G canon, it's established that there was nuance to the Jedi in the main universe. It's just that the Jedi didn't really have a say in their involvement in the war. Now, in the T canon, the EU, and the Disney canon, it's expressed that the Jedi did have a say to some extent. But in the G canon, George makes it clear that Palpatine drafted them into the war because they were Republic citizens who were just doing civil service for the Republic. But Palpatine drafted them into the war. Of course, he wants to corrupt their minds with the horrors of war so that they'll turn more into soldiers. And from the perspective of the galaxy, these Jedi aren't going to be seen as, the peacekeepers they once were.
So yeah, like that's the thing. Palpatine, even in the EU, he is a consummate chess master. He's like the Mobius of Star Wars.
Honestly,
He
the dumbest version of Palpatine has to be the Disney canon one, if you ask me.
well, can you is that really that shocking to you? This is coming from Disney, but oh well.
Well, no, it's much less of trying to own Disney canon, Nathan, and it's much more of the fact that a lot of his plans are either A, incomplete, have holes in them, or B, it's like he doesn't have a clear idea of what he wants, and his motivations are all over the place. So Disney canon Palpatine to me is the weakest one, not just terms of intelligence, but also in terms of power, because G canon Palpatine and EU Palpatine and even T canon Palpatine were able to achieve great lengths of power. The only time Disney canon Palpatine was close to achieving something great was in Star Wars Rebels when he had access to the world between worlds, which showed him the past, the present, and the future of the Star Wars universe, at least the Disney canon one. But he lost that, because Ezra beat him in that show. So it's like that was his one chance to achieve actual power. Outside of that, there was the shit with Rey and the clones, and it's like all that amounted to was nothing. So it's like Disney canon Palpatine has to be not just the least competent version of the character, but he also has the most missed opportunities imaginable. It's established that in the Disney canon that he had the planet destroying Star Destroyers and Exegol all the way back to Empire. And by the logic of Disney canon, Nathan, instead of using all that shit to win against the rebels, he chooses to use the rinky-dink second Death Star that he still hasn't, completed building in Return of the Jedi. And this is a problem much more with Disney's shitty continuity, if anything, and their plot holes and their lack of care for lore and consistency. But taking that out of the equation, what they've established is that Palpatine is so fucking stupid that he had resources that could have let him win against the rebels and change the outcome of everything. But instead he chose to use an incomplete, Death Star, and he lost.
Oh yeah, and what was I going to say? But yeah, anyway, like we were going to talk about the pros and cons of like the EU and G canon and other Jedi. If I can say there's one con to the Jedi and the EU, it's that as much as the EU tries to humanize them, man, do they bastardize them. Like they make them look like the biggest dickheads in the galaxy from point A to point B.
I mean, the thing is that in the EU, it gets very complicated because it's established that the Jedi don't kidnap kids. They get the permission from the parents and the kids and everything. But
Right.
yeah, in the G canon, they clearly get the permission of the parents and the kids can leave whenever they want. But in the EU, it's expressed that the Jedi will go by any method to any means necessary to get a hold of kids. And it's honestly very interesting. Like how Mace, a good example is when a Jedi or is when a youngling, a baby was collected by the Jedi and brought to the Order, and the parents who were undecided on the whole ordeal basically hired a bounty hunter to sneak up in there and get their baby back. Mace Windu did whatever he could to stop the bounty hunter, and at the end of this EU comic, the bounty hunter expresses that this family just wants to see their kid again. And if I remember correctly, Mace still has the kid, like the kid still stays at the Jedi Temple, and I think the bounty hunter is let go. But the fact here is that the Jedi basically in this context essentially were pretty much open to preventing that child from going back to their family in that scenario. No matter the situation, like the baby, if I remember, didn't go back to the family, and Mace ponders about it a bit. Thinking about his life as a Jedi and everything, and the fact that he never really met his family. But the more I think about it, Nathan, it makes the whole situation even more messed up than it is.
I was going to say depressing, not just messed up, but
Yeah.
yeah, I think the Jedi. Actually, this is one of the things the EU point had that kind of had me that soured my view of the Jedi, at least in the EU. There was a group. I've told you this before about the Legion of Leto.
Yeah.
Like they just said they wanted to study it, not practice it, study it, understand what the dark side bogan was. The Jedi's response to saying when they decided to do this, even after they told them no, was they went to war with them. They lied to the Republic about what they were doing, from what I hear. Claimed that the guy who led it, Xandor, was actually a warlord. Like, they come off looking like the biggest evil assholes in this situation. And they go down in history as heroes, and Xandor is remembered as a villain. Like, it's a very Arden Azunia kind of thing.
Yeah, that's another one. Honestly, I don't know if Ryan Johnson was into the Old Republic video games or anything, but it could explain why Jake Skywalker tries to murder Ben in his sleep, because he's getting visions of what could happen in the future with Ben turning to the dark side, and it's like in the Old Republic EU comics, during the time of the Jedi Sith Wars or the new Sith Wars, basically the Jedi were having visions of their Padawans turning to the dark side, and becoming their enemies. So they killed their Padawans. They killed their Padawans before anything could happen. And I'm like,
Yeah, they did something like that in Marvel once. I think it was Captain Marvel had this mutant who could predict things.
oh shit, Civil War 2?
No, it wasn't Civil War 2. And I don't think it was anyway. And there was this one thing that predicted, I guess, I can't remember what the guy's name was, a black guy. I think it was Miles Morales, that he would commit a crime.
Yeah, I know. Civil War 2.
Oh, this was Civil War 2?
Yeah, dude. In the comics, I mean.
Oh, I barely remember anything about that because I've only seen comic historians' videos on the subject. So this is all based on memory. My memory can sometimes be unreliable, as you know. But that sounds like, and her solution to this was to, I guess, arrest or detain him for a crime he hadn't committed yet. So it sounds like that to me.
Right.
So that's one. So that's another con. Another con is, actually, here's a pro. Even in the EU, they are still the good guys because you compare them to the Sith.
Oh, right.
Compared to the Sith, no, they are still the good guys. It's like a question of what evil do you prefer living with, the Jedi or the Sith? I'd rather have the Jedi.
Well, the interesting thing about I would say the Sith when it comes to the EU is that they're much more complicated than they are in the G canon. The Sith in the G canon, I'm not going to say they're simple. They're not simple. They are nuanced, but in the G canon, the Sith, they choose the path of the dark side. They get corrupted by it. They basically, become agents of evil. And that's really about it. And it's like taking the dark side, like George said, is like taking drugs. It's like once you start, it all goes downhill. But in the EU, there are cases of Sith who don't exactly, always become the bad guy or always cause destruction. So in a way, the EU kind of makes extreme nuances for the Jedi and the Sith in ways that makes you question the whole situation. Why were there thousands, if not more years dedicated to wars between these two groups when they're not completely good or evil?
No, like I have this weird contention. Like, despite the fact I prefer the Jedi and the EU, they're still assholes. Don't get me wrong, but you do have every once in a while a Sith who pops up who's actually interesting, like Malgus. I consider him the most interesting Sith from the Old Republic, not counting Revan. He had a brutal outlook, from what I can tell. Like, I just got the Deceived book today, so I'll get a better insight into him, hopefully. But like, he was still capable of stuff like love and compassion. He was still capable of seeing, like, unlike most Imperials, he didn't see alien races as inferior eventually, or I don't think he did.
I'm pretty sure he didn't. Oh, damn. Dude, who would have been a great addition to this?
Who?
Nazo. We should have included him.
Well, I sent a link to the group chat. If you saw it, I would.
Oh, you did?
I sent a link of the video to the chat. If he wanted to join, he could have asked, and I would have sent him a link.
Oh, do you want to? I mean, we could see if he wants to join.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
Yeah, I'll go ask him because I'm pretty sure he'll be a great addition to this discussion.
All right, works for me.
Yeah. Oh, dude, I didn't want to talk over you too much, so I'm trying to let you get more words in. I feel like I'm talking over you.
Oh no, I'm letting you talk more or less. Like, here's the thing: I may be a fan of the EU, but I'm still taking in all the stuff. So you probably know more than me. So I feel like it's better if I let you talk more because you probably have a better, more comprehensive perspective than I do.
Well, I do. I believe based on the fact that you're still reading the books you're mentioning, but quite honestly, dude, Nazo knows a lot more than me when it comes to the EU, and that's why I feel like when it comes to discussing the EU, the two of you would probably together would give you an advantage.
I don't know why you want to give me an advantage. Aren't you supposed to be arguing the G can is superior because you're a filthy G snub?
Yeah, I am supposed to be doing that, but my thing is, dude, is that I'd rather this be interesting.
Fair point. Fair point.
Also, I'm not really interested in winning an argument. I'm more interested in discussing the pros and cons of these
Ah,
of the
oh,
versions of these two. It's like I don't know.
yeah, it would probably be better to have knowledge here because what I want to do is just simply have this be you get two sides of the perspective on something, and then the audience can come away with their own decision on it.
Well, what I've noticed is that more or less people usually prefer the T canon, the EU, or the Disney canon because for some reason, the Jedi being flawed or the Jedi being the ones who are mostly at fault is very popular in the Star Wars fandom. It's an interesting concept. I'm not entirely against the idea. There's some pretty good stories where you could criticize the Jedi. There's a lot of them, but I've noticed that people usually prefer that, and people like me who prefer to see the Jedi as George portrayed them are like rare. Like G Canon fans or George Lucas, what are they called? George Lucas Star Wars enthusiast or
G enthusiasts.
yeah, G enthusiasts. Yeah, it's like we're very rare. And the true irony is that we're the ones who are fans directly of the head creator. We're fans exactly with exactly everything he did, but there's less of us than there are any other kind of Star Wars fan. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's weird. Like I would expect there to be a bigger number, like or at least more than the sequel trilogy fans. Like I would expect more than that at least.
Yeah, it's like I guess we're the ones who are like going in the catacombs or something or in the libraries. We're studying every single bit of information while everyone else is just collecting things in a more mainstream way, and that's all they need, I guess.
Yeah, and plus, actually, here's the weird thing about Star Wars lore. It's kind of hard to take all of it in. Like, take all the fighting forms. I tried researching that for my story.
Yeah,
It was hard for me to
different,
take all of it in.
the different forms of fighting in you're referring to the different lightsaber forms in the EU, right?
Yeah, there's 7 of them, I think.
Oh yeah, there are 7 of them. And if to master all 7 is hard, to master one of them is hard enough, let alone mastering all 7, which I hear is mostly impossible.
Oh yeah, I heard of one guy. He knew 3 forms of combat. That was a Star Killer.
Mm.
He knew forms 4, 5, and 6. I don't think he mastered them though. Didn't live that long.
I don't know if he ever completed his training. Maybe he did, but he sure whooped Palpatine and Vader's ass, and I'm surprised. It's like
Well, yeah, he was very strong in the Force. Like the guy was a wrecking ball.
honestly, I said this before. Me and my friends have said it a lot, but Star Killer to us is basically Rey done right. Like the concept of making an extremely powerful character who's a clone and was born the unnatural way, but Star Killer still had to work like hell to get where he was. Rey just got her powers because the Force awakened inside of her, some shit like that.
Yeah, like Star Killer, from what I understand, like I never read the Force Awakens book. Like I only got the game.
Dude, the Force. If you read the books, all they do is further Rey being a Mary Sue.
No, I meant the Force Unleashed, not the Force
Oh,
Awakens.
well, anyway, Vader was Starkiller's master, and Vader tortured the shit out of him, put him through hell and back, lied and manipulated to him, and put him through some of the harsh training I could imagine in Star Wars. And it's like it makes sense how also considering his high force sensitivity, which I hear some people say rivals Anakin's. It honestly makes sense to me how far Star Killer had come, at the end of it. But with Rey, it's like, okay, she just gets force abilities despite no training because X, Y, and Z, and X, Y, and Z don't even make any sense. They contradict each other.
Yeah, but Star Killer, like the funny thing for me is like he actually shows Vader would have been a lousy dad.
Hmm?
He shows me that Vader would have been a lousy dad.
Probably.
Like he put like I think I heard one time like I was watching a developer video where it said, I think the idea for Starkiller was, what if Luke said yes to joining Lord Vader? Darth Vader, what would happen to Luke? And the answer is Starkiller, more or less.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know if I know you're not the biggest Star Wars Rebels fan, but I heard people say that Ezra Bridger is Disney canon Starkiller.
I'm, I'm sorry. What the frick?
It's kind of like how people say Canon Jarrus is Disney canon's Kyle Katarn. Though I don't see the Ezra one. I could see the canon one. I think him and Kyle have some similarities, but Ezra and Starkiller, that just seems way off base, in my opinion.
Yeah, I don't see it. Ezra, he's not as powerful as Starkiller. Like Starkiller was like basically like a midichlorian in human form.
Honestly, I've always been a little confused about Starkiller's abilities, to some degree. It's like if they said that he was, maybe if they pulled a Ray and said that he had a mix of Anakin's DNA along with the original along with some other DNA, and then you have Vader training him like hell, teaching him, and him suffering, then his powers would make a lot more sense to me. But what they did was fine.
I always interpreted it as Starkiller basically is like what happens if a Jedi or Sith. They took like the raw power of the Force and had no restraint on how they implemented it, like pure destruction in all its form and raw potential. That's how I looked at Starkiller. Is just he has no restraint on how he implements the Force. He looked for creative ways to use it.
Yeah.
And that's how he acts the way that's how he operates the way he does. Like he's just really powerful with the Force. I don't know, maybe like there was always this prophecy of a powerful chosen one who would come and restore balance to the Force. Well, it was never said someone who could rival the chosen one wouldn't show up one day.
Well, funny enough, I have a friend named Xavier. He usually goes by Revan. He's come to believe that within the EU, the chosen one prophecy kind of works like Avatar: The Last Airbender, where every few generations there's a new chosen one. And he believes that Revan was the original, was one of the earlier chosen ones, and that Anakin was one of the newer chosen ones. Now, to me, I know how it works in G canon. In G canon, there's only one chosen one. That's Anakin. He brings balance to the Force. He does his thing. Maybe there's a possibility of others, but that's not clear. But when it comes to the EU, it's like maybe it does work like Avatar instead of just being one. I don't know.
Yeah, but doesn't a chosen one, if that was the case, don't avatars usually live out their lives, die, and then get reincarnated into the next cycle and become another, live out their life again?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, Z Wolf.
Z-Wolf. Oh, okay. I guess he got a link.
Yeah, I sent him the link.
Wait, so if Z-Wolf is our second, if Z-Wolf's our first viewer, who's the second one?
No idea.
Mm.
But anyway, yeah, so that's how I look at Starkiller. It's just like, I think he was, I don't know, maybe he was meant to be like a successor to Anakin in terms of chosen one power, and then he was just like Anakin, but with no restraint. Like, and that's saying something because Anakin probably tried to keep himself in check on some level. I like to think Starkiller was like, yeah, I'm not keeping myself in check. I am going to use the Force in its rawest potential.
Oh, space monkeys are yeah. No. The thing is, Anakin didn't hold himself back. The reason why Vader is not where Anakin the reason why Vader is not where Anakin could be is because that fight with Obi-Wan basically messed up his potential.
Yeah.
Anakin, he lost significant amounts of his body. And according to George, according to George, losing arms and limbs like the way Anakin did can affect your Force sensitivity. This means characters like Anakin and Luke would probably be even more powerful than they ever were if they didn't lose parts of their body, because that's a part of that's part of their nature, their natural physique. They need that to elevate themselves So since Anakin lost his arms and legs, there was always a limit ever since that fight that he would have to, stick with, because after that, a lot of his potential was taken away.
So what then? Starkiller was just like more powerful than him or something? I don't. That kind of blows a hole in my theory then.
Well, like I said, it's popular. A lot of fans believe that Starkiller's abilities rival Anakin's, at least, in terms of that. But the real deal breaker here is that if Anakin didn't go through the trials of Mustafar to become the evil Lord Vader, he would have been the most powerful Force user in Star Wars, because his potential would have been crazy. And this is why George says that that Obi-Wan changed the fate of the universe by showing up to face Anakin. Because if he didn't, Anakin would have been king of the universe. So what does that tell us, Nathan? That tells us that in one of the earlier timelines, Anakin kills Palpatine, becomes the Emperor, and he rules everything, and he has all this power. So when Obi-Wan shows up to Mustafar and kicks his ass, that creates an alternate timeline where the events go out the way we know they did, because Obi-Wan changed the fate of reality by showing up and facing Anakin.
Let's be fair, he just barely kicked Anakin's ass. Like, Anakin was giving him a really
all right, fine. He barely kicked his ass. Let's share.
I'm sorry, but that's like Odysseus squaring off against Achilles, basically. Like, one guy is very wrathful, the other one is more smart.
All right. I'll give you that.
Or actually, no, it's scratch that. Comparing Obi-Wan to Odysseus is an insult to Odysseus.
Oh shit! I didn't know you didn't like Obi-Wan that much.
No, I don't. I don't like trolls.
Wow. All right. Well.
Plus, he lied to Luke's face.
He didn't lie. Well, okay, he bullshitted him, but I wouldn't say he lied.
And plus, there's that whole from a certain point of view, like, I'm like, you lying jet. Like, I hate that debate. I hate that argument from a certain point of view. Okay, well, how about this? 100 years ago, I could beat you with a mop stick and say from a certain point of view, you had it coming.
Okay. No, but anyway, the thing is that Anakin, if he didn't, since he was the chosen one created by the Force itself, literally a virgin birth, if he didn't lose his limbs and if he didn't burn to death, then he would be the most powerful Force user, which means that even Starkiller would not be able to get near the power that he would have. But Anakin traded all of that shit over, an imaginary power in his head that he thought he would have if he fully embraced the dark side. The real tragedy is that people often say, well, the dark side is more powerful or some shit like that. And yeah, the dark side is faster in terms of potential. But the reality is that the light side overall gives you more power. And the real tragedy is that if Anakin stayed on the straight and narrow, then he would have had everything in terms of his abilities, and maybe he could have prevented Padme's death that way. But instead, he went for the dark side and basically got a little more power at a faster rate, but lost the grand potential that he could have had and doomed the galaxy.
Yep, and he really... Like, that's the thing. I think ego and wrath was his... Like, again, I like to compare Anakin to the Achilles of Star Wars. He was done in by his own ego and wrath.
Yeah, I often hear that.
Well, you hear other people say that?
Yeah, I hear people say that about him. His ego and wrath did him in.
I mean, in some ways, Star Wars is basically like a Greek tragedy, so that makes sense.
Oh, no, yeah, that does play a role. We had 3 views, then we had 2, then it went to 1, now it's back at 2.
Yeah, I don't question it. I just go along with it.
Yeah, might as well.
Yeah, I don't question it. I'm a nobody on YouTube. I've made peace with that.
Cool, fair enough. But anyway, the real truth is, Nathan, is that when we compare the G Canon and the EU when it comes to a lot of things, the real sadness of it is that the EU Jedi changed quite a bit. And some people say these changes were warranted or they work better because, we're Westerners. So, but my point here is that, with Luke's Jedi Academy in the EU, you can get married, you could see your family members, at least on the regular, and you still get to do stuff that feels more like akin to what we do, Nathan, in our lives, and still be Jedi. Whereas in the G canon, it's established that Luke, continues the rigid traditions of the Jedi. He does not get married, and honestly, he doesn't even have a kid. In the G canon, he rebuilds the entire Jedi temple. Helps bring back the Jedi Order, and Han and Leia's children, which are Kira and Sam, if I remember correctly, lead that Jedi Order to a better future. Now, in the EU, it's established that Luke has Mara Jade, and he has a kid named Ben Skywalker, and Han and Leia have Jaina, Jason, and Anakin Solo, and huh?
Did you say Jaina?
Yeah, she's that's the daughter. Jason is the brother, and Anakin Solo's the little brother.
Oh, I thought it was Jaina. I always thought it was pronounced Jaina, not Jaina.
Yeah, you know what, Jaina? Yeah, you could say that. I've heard some people say Jaina or Jaina. It really doesn't matter. But yeah, that's currently where the EU is, and with the EU, it's like it gets more complicated and nuanced because Luke's Jedi Academy and Order in the EU, they make some adjustments or updates to the Jedi, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning about how the EU writers and Filoni personally feel like the Jedi could improve, and that there are valid criticisms against them. Whereas George, being the traditionalist that he is, believes that the Jedi were always right in the G canon and that they weren't wrong.
Yeah, then again, on George Lucas, I choose to look at him as a Jedi apologist. That's how I look at him.
A Jedi. Well, I mean, he made the Jedi.
I know, that's the point.
Yeah.
I don't blame him for the record. Like, they're his creations. He was free to do with them as he pleased.
Yeah, true.
But, yeah, no, the G canon Jedi, I would prefer them to the EU Jedi on the grounds of they're less likely to do something fucked up.
Well, the G canon Jedi stuck to traditions throughout, and they did what they could. And at the end of the day, their views were right. And because of them, the galaxy, was able to help the New Republic, which is led by Chancellor Leia, into a better era of peace. You see, the thing about the G canon Jedi is that the G canon Jedi, it's made very clear that the G canon Jedi not just knew what they were doing, but were right. It's just that everyone else wanted to impose their views and their beliefs, including Anakin, on how things should be done, which was more selfish-like, and as a result, chaos came. And Luke learns that only by keeping these traditions and embracing them can he, save the universe from utter annihilation, and in a way by helping his father bring balance to the Force by inspiring him to be a Jedi again. But in the EU, it's much more complicated because Luke he questions a lot of where he is as a Jedi, and he doesn't have Ben anymore because it's established that in the EU, Force Ghosts have a time limit, which is ironic because in the G canon, Force Ghosts are eternal. They don't have a time limit. They can go on forever. Same for the Disney canon, same for the T canon. Force Ghosts don't have a time limit. But in the EU, they do. So Luke is on his own, and Luke is questioning things. And as he's forming his Jedi Order, he's making changes that he thinks would suit the Jedi better in the future because the EU has portrayed the Jedi as flawed, and he does. But the interesting thing about Luke's Jedi Order is that even though it lasts for a long time in the EU, not just does the flaws of how Luke established it come out. But Luke ends up almost nearly turning to the dark side over the death of his wife Mara. And he has to understand that attachments are wrong. So the interesting thing is that in the EU, Nathan, like a lot of religions in real life, Luke comes in, makes updates to the religion, makes updates based on the status quo of the environment and the culture he currently lives in. And those flaws still come to bear because the traditions were made for a reason. And Luke now has to live with, the choices he made along with everyone else in order to lead the galaxy, help fight and lead the galaxy to a better future. The new changes don't necessarily change. They stay where they are, but Luke now has to deal with what he created when it comes to his Jedi Order in the EU.
Yeah, I can't say I blame him though for snapping that one time.
Well, when I believe Jason killed Mara. Yeah.
Yeah, I also like the fact he put him in his place at one point after he learned he did it.
Mm-hmm. But here's one thing I can give EU Luke is that EU Luke understood that he has flaws and that he needs to correct himself. Disney canon Luke makes one of the dumbest fucking mistakes ever imaginable. It's pathetic. And after he makes this fucking mistake, does he take responsibility for what he did and go out there and try to keep the galaxy safe? No, he blames the Jedi, he blames the galaxy, he blames a lot of shit. And then when after Rey runs off, he's after he's acting like an asshole, he's like, okay, let me get off my no, I'm not gonna get off my lazy ass. I'm gonna meditate and send an astral projection to do my work.
Huh.
I mean, look, the force projection thing was cool. I wish we saw more new abilities like that, but my point is that version of Luke Skywalker, basically to me, is an embarrassment to the character. And I feel bad that Mark Hamill had to play that.
Yeah, he was pretty pissed about that from what I hear.
Oh, yeah, a lot of people were.
And ladies and gentlemen, for the record, I don't like Mark Hamill some days, but yeah, I really feel bad for him in that instance.
So did I. I mean, in some of those interviews, it looked like he was crying.
Yeah, think about this. This was his magnum opus, kind of, that character.
Yeah.
And Ryan Johnson, JJ or Jar Jar Abrams,
Oh my god.
and Kathleen Kennedy and Ryan, and everyone at Disney ruined it.
They did ruin it. They did.
Yeah, and I just got a tweet from Space Monkey.
Oh, did he say something?
Yeah, I was tweeting about that book, and he's like, "Fuck Disney, it's not canon, or it's not Legends." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's not Legends. For me, EU is canon and G is canon. Disney will never be canon in my eyes."
Badass. But in all seriousness, Nathan, I have to ask you this personally. Since you started this video, you wanted to have a debate about which is better, the G canon Jedi or the EU Jedi. But to be honest with you, dude, the EU is so expansive that there are so many different versions of the Jedi within that very category. You have the Jedi, which practice the light and the dark. You have the stereotypical Jedi of the prequel era. And then you also have the Jedi who are basically Luke's, the new Jedi, which are of the Jedi Academy, which is Luke's version of them. And to top it all off, you have other force user organizations that exist outside the Jedi and the Sith that try to practice the light side, the dark side, or try to attempt to, learn gray. So it's like the EU has a lot of things. I gotta ask, dude. Which one would you see yourself in, EU wise? You said you prefer the EU Jedi, right?
Okay, if you told me I had to pick, I'm not gonna lie, I'd be tempted to flip a coin to decide because either way the Jedi are fucked. But
I mean, honestly, the most peaceful one to me, dude, is probably Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order.
Yeah, but let's say you're not born into that order. Let's say you're
Mhm.
born into the one before Luke. And
Yeah, the
I would
prequel
say,
era.
yeah, I would say I prefer the EU one because, like, just on the grounds of you can technically be a very complex kind of. You don't have to be a jaded kind of person. You can be your own man. Well, not your own man. That's not a good comparison, but or a good analogy.
The thing is, it doesn't matter what version of the Jedi we're talking about, Nathan. In terms, not even in terms of canon, you'll always have your individuality. It's just that you have rules and responsibilities, or you can't be a Jedi.
Yeah, I guess I would say E because again, I'm an EU snob. Like I'm an EU supremacist. I've said this multiple times.
Oh my God, EU supremacist.
Okay, I can either be an EU supremacist or a Mandalorian supremacist. Pick one.
Why not both?
True. Yeah, we'll go with the Russian option.
No. But me personally, when it comes to the G canon, not just do I prefer the G canon Jedi because they're the most consistent versions of the Jedi in the Star Wars multiverse, but also because when it comes to the G canon, the Jedi are the same throughout the whole time. But you'll also have like the what are they called? The Shaman of the Wills, which is a force organization that coexist with everything else in the G canon. You have the Sith, and then you have the Jedi. And no matter the era of Star Wars in the G canon, I prefer the Jedi because you get to have your individuality, but you have rules and responsibilities, and you help people, and you also get to live in relative peace for the most part. If we're saying the prequel, the before the prequel era, or after George Lucas's sequel trilogy, the sequel era, you get to live in relative peace. You get to help keep the galaxy in order and safe, and loving, and with your compassionate, um, with your form of compassion. And things are nuanced. They are nuanced, but they're not so complicated that the very foundations and rules of everything just don't make sense. So that's the reason why I prefer the G Canon Jedi. I'd want to be a part of the G Canon Jedi out of all the Force organizations in the G Canon, is because not just are they the most consistent, but often what they do helps the galaxy overall and can lead to relative peace.
Yeah, I think my other problem with the GCAN is like I think you told me I can't remember if we've covered this or not in the stream, but didn't you tell me that in the GCAN the idea George Lucas has was the Sith came first, their empire crumbled to the ground, kind of like Disney is, only without the Hindenburg comparisons,
Yeah.
and then the Jedi came and the Sith kind of blamed them over a misunderstanding.
Yeah, well, George said the Sith had a perceived idea of revenge. They believed that the Jedi were just waiting for them to kill each other and then take their place. So it's like a perceived sense of they, schemed against they schemed our demise. We need to kill them. That sort of thing.
Right, right. Now, I as much as that sounds funny to me, I prefer the EU version of the Jedi in this regard because the Jedi and a Sith have a clear, logical, understandable reason for hating each other, especially the Sith. The
Yeah.
Sith more or less started this, kind of like the
Yeah.
Jedi before the Sith, the dark Jedi,
The Jedi or the Dark Jedi?
the Dark Jedi. They usually had to put up with some shit from the Jedi, but that was it.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't till the Jedi and the Republic fucked with the Sith homeworld that the Sith people and the dark side users had a real grudge against them or a legitimate reason to have a grudge.
Yeah.
And the Jedi admit they fucked up. Like one of their historians basically said, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. In hindsight, that was a mistake.
Right.
Although I have to wonder how much of that is legitimate regret, or is it just, yeah, it made us look bad in the long run. My cynical side wants to know if they actually feel bad about it, or they just feel bad that it made them look bad in hindsight.
Probably both.
Probably because, like I said, ladies and gentlemen, the EU Jedi are dickheads. They are jackasses.
Well, the thing about the EU Jedi, Nathan, is that the EU Jedi, they're very complicated in the sense that the EU Jedi to me prove exactly what I say about how George says Jedi should not be involved in wars. The EU Jedi are direct evidence of that because the EU Jedi, out of all the versions of Jedi in the Star Wars multiverse, have gone through the most wars. They've seen the most horror and death and destruction. And they're the ones who are not just very mixy and hypocritical in their morals, but they also sometimes end up on borderline Sith depending on the situation. So,
Yeah.
due to the excessive death and wars, the EU Jedi, you've seen the best and the worst from them. And as a result, to me, Nathan, they're perfect examples, like I said just before, of why Jedi should never be involved in wars. Or at least, if there is a war, the Jedi should just not be involved because that will immediately warp them to the dark side and bad things will happen if that, comes to pass.
Oh, definitely. You kind of see this in the Old Republic MMO.
Yeah.
Like if you're a light side Sith and you try to reason with two Jedi who've trapped you, like you were lured into a trap by two Jedi, you were looking for Nomen Kar's Padawan, and then one of them seems a little bit more itching for a fight. And the Sith on the light side is the option saying, look, doesn't the light side demand temperance, restraint? And he's like, who are you to judge us? You were the reason we have to take these measures.
Well, it's not just that. It's not just that, but it's also a matter of the Sith. The whole reason why the Sith exists in the EU is basically due to the fact that the Jedi, through lots of conquest and wars and shit, along with practicing the light side and the dark side, I'm referring to the Jedi here, were basically constantly in conflict. And often Force users, trained Force users, I must add, weren't a fan with how they were being treated in certain circles. And they're like, why the fuck are we, just helping people? Why aren't people, listening to us? We should be ruling them because it's like they're treating us this way. And it's like, if it weren't for us, they'd be dead. So this is often what led to the Sith existing. It was like, we're tired of helping people who don't, respect us for who we are. Instead, we want to basically rule. We want to call the shots.
Yeah. How did the Jedi respond to the Yuzai Vong? I don't remember much about that.
The Yuzang Vong, they were like an alien species outside of the Star Wars galaxy in the EU. And they were able to counteract the Force, if I remember correctly. They were a very dangerous threat. And Luke's Jedi Order fought countless battles with them through an everlasting war, which almost led to the destruction of the New Republic. And it took a lot just to take the Yuzang Vong down.
Yeah, but like, what did they think of them at the time? Where they were like, "Oh, these things need to be destroyed completely," or were they like, "We need to find a way to make them stop"?
Oh, the Yuzang Vong made themselves known, dude. They attacked everywhere, if I remember. I got to go back.
Lawrence tried working with them for a while.
Yeah,
it didn't go so well.
Well, no, the Yuzang Vong are just mindless creatures. Honestly, if you ask me, and this might be a take, but to me, the Yuzang Vong, if you ever ask me, who would be worse than the Sith, I'd say the Yuzang Vong. They're way worse.
Oh yeah, in the EU, there's actually more threats to a Jedi. Like in the EU, you have 3 threats to a Jedi. You have the Yuzai Vong, the Mandalorians, and the Sith.
Right.
The only thing that separates them from the Mandalorians and the Sith is the Yuzai Vong have no real reason to hate the Jedi.
Well, the Yuzang Vong more or less just want to conquer. It's like the Jedi were no different to them, if I remember, than anyone else. They go around, they conquer lands. They're kind of like the Viltrumites in Invincible. Yeah, it's basically what they're like. They go around, they conquer lands. They're conquerors, and the Jedi were just another obstacle in the way for them.
Yeah, I thought it was they were cut off from the Force. I remember hearing that.
Yeah, that was a lot of EU writers, for some reason, thought that it'd be interesting to create situations where the Force can't just be used for any situation, so they'll limit it, like making Force Ghosts only have a limited amount of time before they become one with the Force, or having creatures or fighters that could counteract the Force. Like they were trying to up the stakes that way, which is cool. But what I don't like is that when they did that, it kind of, in my opinion, got in the way of what the Force was. The Force isn't everything, it's life itself. So to weaken it like that for the sake of tension, I don't think that's a good idea. What I would have done is I would have had it that Force users can't access the Force as clearly with like these creatures around, or the using Vong can, the using Vong can like manipulate the connection between Force users and the Force itself. But I'm not writing that, these things weaken the Force. I think that's not really good. But that's just my opinion.
Okay.
Who were using Vong?
No.
Yeah. He put they were void twice on the Space Monkey.
Oh, what the frick?
I don't know. If he puts they were void like for the third time, I'm going to assume some shining shit is happening.
I'm going to assume he's having mental problems because that does not sound like him.
I don't know.
Either that or he's messing with us. One of the two. And he's gone.
Who's gone?
There was two. Now there's one. Oh well. But,
like you said, don't question it, right?
Yeah, don't question it. Don't question it. Yeah, I've come to accept that YouTube is probably pulling some shenaniganery on me.
I mean, maybe, I don't know. What I'm surprised is Nathan, I think if you want more attention, you're gonna have to make more YouTube videos, because streams are awesome, but if you just make stream after stream, I don't think that's what's gonna get you more attention.
Yeah, probably, but how do I put this? I've made like 200 videos. They aren't that. Yeah, I've made 200 videos or so. I can't exactly remember. Actually, I could probably check. Let me see.
I'm just saying that you may want to add editing, graphics, stuff like that.
I would like to, believe me. I'm sick of doing these PowerPoints.
I mean, honestly, I think they're good, but if you have more variety, that's probably what's going to get you attention. Yeah.
Goku was. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
So yeah, well, what was saying? So yeah, but that's the funny thing about the EU is like the Jedi. As much as I like to say they are the victim in the prequel trilogy, or at least I consider them the victims in that scenario.
Yeah.
A lot of the problems they have in the EU down the line is technically their fault. Like the Sith and the dark side users, they didn't exactly have a problem with them per se. They probably felt like they were cast out by their brothers and treated like
the Sith and the dark side users were a result of the Jedi being corrupted by the wars and everything around them, especially when they tried to create kingdoms and rulers and shit. Which the whole point that's being gotten across, Nathan, is that if you give Force users power and they get corrupted by it, well, then Force users end up becoming a big fucking problem. Whether we're talking to G Canon, where Force users were manipulated by power and there were Sith empires, or we're talking EU, where the Jedi broke off into the Jedi and the Sith, and they were fighting over power. My point here is, Nathan, is that no matter the Star Wars universe, in the Star Wars multiverse, power, like the kind of power we're talking about, will always corrupt Jedi and Force users in general.
I
lost you, didn't I?
Not really. No, you didn't. But no, the other thing is, like, take the Mandalorians for example. They were kind of put in a position where they were forced to fight the Jedi, and they're like, "You are a worthy opponent." Like like the Mandalorians and the Jedi became to each other what Native Americans at one point in time were to America.
Right.
They were our most worthy adversary.
Yeah, you see that with Pride.
I mean,
I'm messing with you, man.
I know. The funny thing is, I am technically related to natives, so any natives who take offense to me saying that, I don't think you should be offended. I think you should be proud. the biggest ass kicking it probably ever got.
Dude, all I think that's gonna do is make them hate you more. I don't know. These days, it's not even hard for people to not like you.
Yeah, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who don't know, Dan often says, Nathan, they're going to hang us, and I'm going to blame you for it.
Yeah, when we're in the afterlife, I'm gonna be like, damn it, Nathan, because of you, we're fucking dead.
Like one time I said, look, I like all races and hair colors, especially if they're on women. Beyond that, I don't give a shit. And he's like, Nathan, they're going to hang us for that, and I'm going to strangle you while they're doing it.
I said that in those words?
No, I'm paraphrasing.
Oh. Okay. Well, it's funny.
I mean, it kind of is, but at the same time, I'm like, what'd I do?
Oh, trust me, dude, you don't know. I've seen people nearly lose their lives over less. It's not even funny.
Yeah, and I thought Jedi were oversensitive.
I'm part Cherokee. I don't care. Okay, well, welcome to the club. I'm part German. You don't see me getting thrown in prison for what the Nazis did. Okay, maybe that was a bit too harsh. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, no. Let me think. I'm related to a guy who possibly got kicked out of France for being not Catholic.
Wow.
Yeah, he was in Normandy. They kicked him out. I found that kind of funny when I heard it. I was kind of proud of it, too. Like, seriously, you fuck up so bad just by saying, I believe differently, that they exile you from your home country and you have to live in your neighboring enemy country. I took some pride in that. Because I don't like Catholics sometimes.
I mean, who kicks someone out of France because they're not Catholic?
I don't know. This is why I found the story questionable.
Well, I mean, look. You know, they probably did do it. It's not hard for me to believe it. I'm just saying that it feels a little off, that's all.
It probably is off. It probably is off. And honestly, that's not the worst thing about my family. The worst thing is, ladies and gentlemen, most of the countries I make fun of, I'm related to. Except for Australia. I looked out there. I'm not related to those fuckers.
Well, you don't know that yet.
Oh, and it looks like my power is about to go out.
Mm.
That's going to suck because the lights are just flickering on and off.
So is this going to shut down too?
No, it'll be on. Although I think we might want to end it for now because...
Yeah, make this a part one.
Yeah, let me...
Yeah. All right, well, it was awesome talking to everybody that's not here.
Yeah, see you, Dan. See you, Space Monkey. See you, Z-Wolf.
Yeah, later.
Later.